Chapter 11. From my seat on the train I caught only fleeting glimpses of London, but when I emerged from Aldergate station, meaning to walk briskly away, instead I stood for a moment, gazing at a metropolis so dense and vast. All around me towered a man-made wilderness, buildings taller and more forbidding than any of the trees that ever were. My brothers lived here, in this grotesque brick and stone parody of any world I'd ever known, with so many chimney pots and roof peaks, looming dark against a lurid vaporous orange sky. Lead-coloured clouds hung low while the setting sun oozed molten light between them. The Gothic towers of the city stood festive, yet foreboding against that glowing sky, like candles on the devil's birthday cake. I stared until I grew aware of hordes of indifferent city dwellers just brushing past me, going all about their business. Then I took a deep breath, closed my mouth, swallowed, and turned my back to this curiously ominous sunset. Here in London, just as anywhere else, I told myself, the sun went down in the west. Therefore, forcing my flabbergasted limbs to move, I walked down a broad avenue leading in the opposite direction, for I wanted to go east, towards the used clothes stores, the docks, the poor streets, the East End. Within a few blocks I walked into narrow streets, shadowed by crowded buildings. Behind me the sun sank. In the city night no stars or moon shone, but swathes of yellow light from shop windows draped the pavement, seeming to drag down the intervening darkness, all the blacker. Darkness out of which passer-by appeared like visions, vanishing again in a few steps. Like figures out of a dream again, they reappeared and disappeared on the corners, where gas street lamps cast wan skirts of light. Or figures out of a nightmare. Rats darted in and out of the shadows, bold city rats that did not run away as I walked by. I tried not to look at them, tried to pretend that they were not there. I tried not to stare at an unshaven man in a crimson cravat, a starveling boy with his clothing in rags, a great brawny man wearing a bloodied apron, a barefoot gypsy woman on a corner. So there were gypsies in London, too. But not the proud nomads of the country. This was a dirty beggar all grimed with the chimney sweep. This was London? Where were the theatres and the carriages, the jewelled ladies in fur wraps and evening gowns, the gold-studded gentlemen in white ties and cutaway tails? Instead, like a kind of walking doghouse, along came a pale man wearing signboards, front and back. For irreproachable hair gloss, use Van Kep's oil of Macassar. Dirty children swirled around him, taunting, knocking his dented derby off his head. A capering girl shrieked at him, "Where do you keep the mustard?" Evidently a great joke, for her mates laughed like little banshees. The dark streets rang with such noises, shopkeepers roaring at the street urchins, "Be off with ye!" while wagons rattled past and a fishmonger cried, "Fresh haddock for your supper!" and sailors shouted greetings to one another. From an unswept doorway a stout woman shrieked, "Sarah! Willie!" I wondered if her children were tormenting the bored man. Meanwhile, folk brushed past me, chattering in vulgarly loud voices, and I walked faster, as if I could somehow escape. With so many strange sights and so much commotion, small wonder I didn't hear the footsteps following me. I did not notice until the street and night deepened and darkened, or so it seemed at first. But then I realized it was the streets themselves that had grown grimmer. No more shops gave light, only glaring public houses on the corners, their drunken noise spilling into the darkness. I saw a woman standing in a doorway with her face painted, red lips, white skin, black brows, and I guess I was witnessing a lady of the night. In a tawdry, low-cut gown, she reeked so badly of gin that I could smell it even above the stench of her seldom-washed body. But she was not the only source of odour. The whole east end of London stank of boiled cabbage, coal smoke, dead fish among the nearby Thames, sewage in the gutters, and people in the gutters. I saw a man lying drunk or sick. I saw children huddled together like puppies to sleep, and I realized they had no homes. My heart ached. I wanted to awaken those children and give them money to buy bread and meat pies. But I made myself walk on, lengthening my stride. Uneasy. Some sense of danger. A dark form crawled along the pavement in front of me. Crawled. On her hands and knees, her bare feet dragging. I faltered to a halt, staring, struck motionless and witless by the sight of an old woman reduced to such wretchedness, with only a single torn and threadbare dress inadequately covering her, no underpinnings beneath it, nothing on her head either, not even so much as a rag of cloth, and no hair, only a mass of sores covering her scalp. I choked back a cry at the sight, and dully, creeping at a snail's pace on her knuckles and her knees, she lifted her head a few inches to glance at me. I saw her eyes, pallid like gooseberries. But I had stood still a moment too long. Heavy footsteps sounded behind me. I leapt forward to flee, but it was too late. The footfalls rushed upon me, an iron grip grasped my arm. I started to scream, but a steely hand clamped over my mouth. Very close to my ear, a deep voice growled. "If you move or cry out, I will kill you." Terror froze me. Wide-eyed, staring into darkness, I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. As I stood gasping, his grip left my arm and snaked around me, clasping both arms forcibly to my sides, pressing my back against a surface that might as well have been a stone wall, had I not known it to be his chest. His hand left my mouth, but within an instant, before my trembling lips could shape a sound, in the dim light I saw a glint of steel, long, tapering to a point like a shard of ice. A knife blade. Dimly also I saw the hand that held the knife. A large hand in a kid-skin glove of some tawny color. "Where is he?" said the man demanding, his tone most menacing. "What? Where was who?" I could not speak. "Where is Lord Tewkesbury?" It made no sense. Why would a man in London be accosting me about the noble runaway? Who could know I had been in Belvedere? Then I remembered the face I had seen pressed against the glass, peering into the train compartment. "I will ask you once more, and once only," he hissed. "Where is Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Bassleweather?" It must by then have been past midnight. Shouts blurred by ale still rang from the public houses, along with bawdy off-key singing, but the cobblestones and pavements stood empty. What I could see of them, anything could have lurked in the shadows, and this was not the sort of place where one could hope for help. I managed to stammer. "I have no idea." The knife blade flashed under my chin, where, through my high collar, I could feel its pressure against my throat. Gulping, I closed my eyes. "No games," my captor warned. "You are on your way to meet him. Where is he?" "You are mistaken." I tried to keep cool, but my voice shook. "You were laboring under some absurd delusion. I know nothing of—" "Liar!" I felt murder in his arm muscles. The knife jumped, jerked in his hand, slashed at my throat, finding instead the whalebone of my collar. With what could have been my last breath, I screamed. Twisting in the cutthroat's grip, flailing, I lashed upwards and backwards with my carpet bag, feeling it hit his face before it flew out of my grasp. He cursed fearsomely, but although his hold on me loosened, he did not let go. Shrieking, I felt his long blade stab at my side, striking my corset. Then stab again, seeking a passageway to my flesh. Instead, it slit my dress, a long, ragged wound as I tore away from him and ran. I cried, "Help! Someone help me!" blundering into darkness, running, I knew not where. "In here, ma'am," said a man's voice, high and squeaky out of the shadows. Someone had after all heard me crying for help. Nearly sobbing with relief, I turned towards the voice, plunging down a narrow street, steep alley between buildings that reeked of tar. "This way." I felt his skinny hand take my elbow, guiding me a crooked way towards something that glimmered in the night. The river. My guide pulled me onto a narrow wooden walkway that shifted beneath my feet. Some instinct, a misgiving, made me balk, my heart beating harder than ever. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "Just do as you're told." And in less time than it takes to tell it, he had twisted my arm behind my back, shoving me forward towards I knew not what. "Stop it!" I braced the heels of my boots against the planks, suddenly more furious than afraid. I had, after all, been mauled about, had lost my carpet bag, had been threatened by a knife, my clothing ruined, my plans also in tatters, and now the one whom I had thought to be my rescuer seemed to be turning into a new enemy. I became wrought. "Stop, villain!" I shouted as loudly as I could. "Hold your tongue!" Twisting my arm painfully, he gave me a hard shove. I couldn't help stumbling forward, but I continued to call out. Curses! Let go of me! Something heavy clouted me over my right ear. I fell sideward, into darkness. It is not fair to say that I fainted. I have never fainted, and I hope I never do so. Say rather that for some time I was knocked out of my senses. When I blinked and opened my eyes, I found myself awkwardly half sitting, half lying, on an odd sort of curved plank floor, my hands bound behind my back and my ankles similarly tied, with rough hemcord in front of me. Swinging from a crude plank ceiling close above, an oil lamp gave off a hot, choking odor as it leaked a dim light. I saw big stones grouped around turpentine-colored water near my feet, as if an awfully travesty of my favorite dell at home. The floor seemed to move beneath me. I felt light-headed. Closing my eyes, I waited for my sickness to pass. But it did not pass. My sense of movement, I mean. And I realized I was light-headed only because my captor, whoever he was, had taken my hat away, probably for fear of its pins. My head, clad in only its snaggled hair, felt exposed and my world seemed to jolt and rock. But I was not ill. I was rather lying in the cellar of a boat. The hull, I mean. I remembered that was what they called it. While I had no experience of barges and ships of such, I had ridden in a rowboat a time or two, and I recognized the floating bumping motion of a small craft in its store, so to speak. In the water, but with its head tied to a post, the ceiling where the lamp swung was on the side of the deck. The filthy puddle at my feet was called bilge, and the stones, I believe, were ballast. Opening my eyes, peering into the gloom, I scanned my shadowy prison, and realized that I was not alone. From the opposite side of the hall, with his hands behind his back and his bound ankles just across the bilge from mine, a boy faced me. Studied me, scowling, dark eyes, hard jaw. Cheap, ill-fitting clothing, barefoot that looked pale, soft, and sore. An uneven stubble of fair hair, and a face I had seen before, although only upon the front page of a newspaper. Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Bayswater.